This is a dressmaker's ham. Hams are meant to last a lifetime, and it's an easy and quick job to repair a ham if you know how. Hi, I'm Sally from dressmakerstudio.com, and in this lesson, I'm going to show you how to repair a ham. This ham has been with me about 40 years, and just recently it developed a big hole. So I'm going to first take the old cover off, measure to make sure both sides are the same, and cut a pattern out of fabric, sew it together, and have a ham. At the end of the video, I will give you a short preview into the next Fashion Forensics episode. So stay tuned and stay with me. The ham is an invaluable pressing tool used for pressing darts, shaping collars, pressing open and shaped seams, tricky and hard to get areas, and you can even pin into the ham as you work. This is the fabric that I've chosen. It's a beautiful wool that I've washed to make sure it is dust-free and also lint-free. And I'm going to cover the other side with linen because linen takes very high heat. Wool will be good against woolens and soft silks. First, I'm going to just cut off the old cover. This is the underneath piece, and it's in pretty good shape. It's got a little bit of a dent right here, so I'm going to see if I can just kind of push the sawdust, because it's filled with sawdust, push it around a little bit. It's interesting because you can actually see the impression of the original plaid right on top of it. The dyes transferred over time. So this is pretty dusty actually, but it's very well made. I hate to lose it. Measure the ham to be sure you're cutting pieces of fabric big enough. I'm taking a piece of muslin, folding it in half, and creasing it. Mark down the center. Determine the center of the ham. Place the folded muslin down the center of the ham and secure it with pins. Now what I'm going to do is pin around the seam of the ham. Once you've marked the seam line of the ham, use a marker and remove the pins. Add seam allowance. I'm adding about 3/8 of an inch. Cut, and now you have a pattern. Stack your fabrics and cut. With the normal stitch, stitch around the narrower end of the new cover, leaving the wide end open to insert the ham. Turn the new cover right side out. And now with the needle and thread, I'm using buttonhole twist because it's very thick thread. I'm going to sew a running stitch along the curve that is already sewn, the narrower curve. You can sew this in the seam or close to the seam. I've chosen to sew it on the linen side, very close to the seam, so that I can capture not only the seam, but the seam allowances, both seam allowances. I'm pushing both seam allowances up toward the linen. I think it'll just make it a lot stronger because the wool is rather soft. The stitches are about 1/8 to 1/4 inch apart. When you finish stitching the curve, take the needle out but leave a long tail of the thread. Repeat the same process on both layers of the open end of the cover. Insert the hem. And you're going to have to really work to get the ham cover to fit well, so pull it down and smooth it as much as possible. Pulling the thread to pull in all the gathers. Inserting the thread through the needle, now is the time to do some back stitches and embed the thread into the ham cover and cut it off. For the rest of my sewing, I'm going to use normal thread. I'm going to start with the woolen side and pull it tight, distributing the fullness and pinning it into the seam around the middle of the ham. And now taking the normal thread, I'm going to sew the wool along the seam line into the ham. I'm doing short diagonal stitches because a diagonal stitch makes it easier to grab all layers of fabric.
And as I sew, I am continually reestablishing the gathers so they'll be nice and smooth. Trim off any excess seam allowance to eliminate bulk. And now folding under the seam allowance of the linen along the seam of the wool. I have made it so that the seam allowance all the way around, both layers of seam allowance point down to the linen side. This way there's a very smooth edge around the whole ham at the seam. And repeat the same process. In this final stitching, what I'm doing is grabbing the wool a little above the seam and into the linen seam allowance so that it pulls the two edges of fabric closer together. Now bury and trim off the gathering stitches. And finally, a good steam will set everything in place.
My newly covered ham will last many more years. I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial. If you have, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe. If you'd like to learn more about the art of fine dressmaking, check out our website at dressmakerstudio.com. And before we close, let me give you a sneak preview into the next Fashion Forensics episode.
Another lovely garment from the Geneva collection, a 1960s midnight navy silk shantung dress with double collar of silk organza and a lace insert. I can't wait to explain to you how this dress was made. It has beautiful lines and inside the dress is just lovely. There's a lot to be learned in fashion forensics about clothes from the past and how they relate to what we make now. Thanks for joining me. See you next time.